my great pleasure to recognize Ben Watkins, who will introduce our distinguished speaker. Ready? And now, we can play all of that.
Thank you very much. Welcome, everyone. So it's my job to provide an introduction for a man who needs no introduction. So it is a great privilege to have Senator Mel Martinez with us today. For those of you who don't know it, many of you do, he is the epitome of the American dream. It's a Cinderella story, but it's not made in the Magic Kingdom. It's in fact true. So Senator Martinez immigrated to the United States from Cuba at the age of 14 under a program sponsored by the Catholic Church called Operation Pedro Pan that brought into the U.S. 14,000 immigrant children. So he has been in Catholic homes, foster care, worked his way through school, and it became the first elected senator for the Cuban American-born senator for the United States, as well as the first person of Cuban American heritage serving on the president's cabinet as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development. Extraordinary accomplishments. The one thing that makes Senator Martinez unique is he started his career in Orlando and was mayor of the city of Orlando. So he's had experience both from the bottom to the top. And I asked him about his accomplishments that he's most proud of, and he was talking about being in the U.S. Senate. And he said, being a mayor is where it really happens, because you see your constituencies every day, and what you do matters in people's lives every day. And he contrasted that with his experience in the Senate was like the faculty lounge, where they did a lot of talking and not much doing. And Senator Martinez is a doer and not a talker. And so currently, and one thing I also did not know about him, he's homegrown. He got his college degree here at FSU, as well as his law degree, which I had no idea. So he's back at FSU, back where it all started. He is currently the chairman of the Southeast and Latin America for J.P. Morgan Chase. Everybody knows J.P. Morgan Chase. You've seen the signs. You know their footprint in Florida. You know how important it is. Latin America, also extraordinarily important to Florida's economy, our trade and our economy and our immigration and our growth. And he didn't sign up for it, but now he has a whole of the Southeast too. It's what happens when you do a good job. You get more responsibility. So with no further ado, I would like, please join me in welcoming Senator Mel Martinez.
Well, thank you, Ben. Thank you very much to all of you. I'm honored to be with you, delighted to have a chance to see so many old friends, and obviously also to meet some new ones. Delighted, Governor, that you're here. Appreciate that. Bill Gunner was my senator when I was a young guy in college, maybe grade school, Bill, I don't know. Anyhow, but I was proud that he was my Florida senator, and a great public servant, and always someone that I admire greatly. So it's really terrific to see so many good people that I've had a chance to interact with in different ways over the years. Dom always kept me straight on how to save money and do things better. And so anyway, a lot of you have a connection, and I appreciate so much some of you coming out and for a chance for us to say hello. So Ben, I appreciate your introduction a lot, and I obviously, my story, I should tell you, by the way, because part of my talk is about the United States' place in the world, and where are we today, and how is that evolving and transforming, and is it right, is it wrong, is it good, is it bad? And I'll let you draw the conclusions, but I'll give you my view on some things. But by the way, when you talk about my American dream and what happened in my life, there really are people who ought to be commended for that. Number one, my parents, who had the courage to send me away without them in the midst of a very difficult situation in Cuba at the time. But I also think, and I always have been incredibly grateful to the foster family in the United States, in Florida, in Orlando, that took me into their home at the request from the pulpit on Sunday, that these young children about whom they knew nothing, about who could not speak their language, needed a place to stay. They didn't know for how long, but they did. So when we talk about these currents that are in our country today of nativism, isolationism, and protectionism, we know that that is part of American history through our history, but we also know that it's not totally who we are as a people, and that we are a country that has always been ingrained by the influence and the opportunity that this country has always generated with immigrants. And so through different waves of people who have come to these shores, many of us have had the benefit and the opportunity to know what it is to live the American dream and hopefully help to pass it on to others. So my public service, to be honest with you, was always inspired by that. And that's why I'm always a great believer that what this country has to offer is unique. And the opportunities that we have to offer are also amazing. So, in the post-World War II world, there was a pretty good consensus that the United States would be engaged in the world. And that there was also a consensus that the world would be more peaceful and that the world would be more prosperous if we traded with one another with as few barriers as possible. And if we engage with one another in a way that would avoid the possibility of misunderstanding and war. There's a great example of this, very specifically, in Europe. The European countries banded together, in part for their reconstruction in a post-war day, for the destruction and the upheaval that had transpired. And so a lot of it had to do with wanting to be in a better place economically. But make no mistake about it, and if there's any clarification needed, Tony Blair provided it for me not too far away, not too far back, which is that part of that genius was also to come together so that unlike their history for hundreds of years, Europe might live in peace. And for the last 70 years, the peace in Europe has been maintained. But just like in the United States, we have this little streak of isolationism and nativism and protectionism. The British people have also decided to leave the European Union. Now that's understandable in many ways, and the British people, the United Kingdom, can decide what and how they do it. But make no mistake about it, that is a little bit disruptive to this European unity that we've seen and has been such an important part of the world. So I only use that as an illustrative example, that as we look at where the United States is today and where we're going in the future, that our relationships abroad are tremendously important, and they mean a great deal to us, and we've benefited economically greatly from it, not only from the opportunity to sell our goods and services to others, but we've also been a part of a very peaceful world, and I would dare say, in my personal case, with some humility, that maybe some of us immigrants who come to our country have also made a contribution, certainly tried. And so, let's talk about USMCA. The United States, USMCA, Mexico-Canada agreement. It used to be called NAFTA, now we call it USMCA. And USMCA is an agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico that essentially modernizes and harmonizes with newer ideas of trade, that which was done in the early 90s and which has been incredibly positive for the United States, but also for Mexico and for Canada. You know, by the way, one of the ways in which we can understand the great success of NAFTA over the years, in spite of the fact that we can hear how terrible it is the fact that our immigration problem is really not Mexico. In fact, vis-a-vis Mexico, we have negative net migration. There's more people returning to Mexico than there are coming from Mexico in the last 10 years or so. And that's because Mexico has been reasonably prosperous. Our immigrant problem comes more from Central America and from other parts of the world and other places, but NAFTA has succeeded to the point that Mexico now has an emerging middle class and has an opportunity for their own citizens to do what they would more naturally do, which is stay home and get a job and support their families, than to immigrate and leave their families and not be able to return. So in any event, the trade relationship between our nations has been a tremendous boon to us. And so the three-way trade between Canada, Mexico, and the United States is 1.4 trillion last year. 1.4 trillion. I mean, I didn't take math at FSU that was good enough to know how many zeros that is. But that's a lot of them. So 1.4 trillion a year, or 3.8 billion daily. So each and every day, $3.8 billion are being traded between these three countries. So now we have an agreement before the Congress. By the way, 1/3 of all agricultural sales between the United States and the rest of the world go to these two countries. 1/3. So it needs modernizing. It has no provisions for e-commerce. When it was done, there wasn't a thought that e-commerce was going to be a part of our world, and now it is, of course. It needs more IP protections, intellectual property, and it needs to also make sure that the labor rules are fair and that the United States workforce can compete favorably with the Mexican workforce and so forth. So all of these things are good. So now this USMCA has been approved, and it needs to be ratified by the Congress, and it needs to go before the House and the Senate. Now this is so important that it is the #1 priority of the United States Chamber of Commerce, the #1 legislative priority of the Business Roundtable, and I would dare say the #1 priority of a lot of other business groups in our country, because it is that fundamental to an opportunity to continue to be bringing jobs to our country as it has done over the years. It sits currently in the Congress, and it has to be approved by the House. The likelihood of its approval, you know, Democrats, I'm a Republican, but I'm not making a partisan statement. For a lot of reasons, Democrats always have a little more trouble than Republicans, traditionally Republicans, with foreign trade agreements. And so it's a bit of a hard sell. It's a tough vote for a lot of Democrats because of the labor unions are not always consonant with it. But in this instance, I think there's a tremendous amount of support because the benefits are so obvious. On the Republican side, traditionally, we've been a party of trade and foreign trade, and so the current tendencies in the Republican Party are a little different than that, but nonetheless, there is a good likelihood that there would be enough votes in both houses to pass the USMCA and have it be signed by the President before the end of this year. There's some trouble in the horizon, though, because there's something, the I word is lurking. The I word means impeachment, and so a little tough to be thinking about legislative priorities of this magnitude and importance when we're really kind of sidetracked with this whole impeachment thing, good or bad. I'm not going to, my talk today is not about impeachment. By the way, we're going to have Q&A later, so if you want to get into more saucy stuff, and I know a few of you are political and Marty's shaking his head, I'm happy to get into them in the Q&A session. But for now, let me stick to that. I think there's a good likelihood that it could get approved, and a lot of forces are moving in that direction. #1, the President needs an accomplishment. This would be a tremendous thing. The Baghdadi thing is a big deal, by the way. That's, not insignificant and worthy of credit, especially to our Delta Force, but also to the President who made the call. It's a difficult call, just like President Obama did with Osama bin Laden. But on the domestic front, it'd be nice to be able to show something. The same is for the House. If the House goes home to re-election and all they have to show for their efforts is impeachment, which ultimately is not going to pass in the Senate, what have you done? What have you done for me? How is my kitchen table better today because of what you've done? And have you fulfilled your promises? Well, USMCA provides them something as well. I think the passage in the Senate is pretty well assured. But to the extent you influence friends and relations, it wouldn't be a bad thing for the USMCA to get approved, I believe, by this Congress. It would be I think it would be a great thing for all concerned, and certainly be a great thing for job creation in our country. So the idea is that the Democrats could say, well, gosh, are we going to give the President this victory? Maybe we wouldn't want to do that. But at the same time, I think Midwestern states like Michigan, Indiana, Ohio would benefit enormously from the continuation of a lot of manufacturing that's now benefiting them, as well as the agricultural states. So it's a messy, complicated little political problem, but one that I hope will be resolved in what I think would be very good for our country. So while at it, I was also asked to talk a little bit about the region to the south. And since I end up there a good bit and travel there some and have had an interest in it. I made some notes in the back of my more formal notes, which I know are here. Here we go. And basically, I just thought I'd do a little roundup of the region and walk with me as we head south. And I'll do that for a few more minutes, and then I'm going to really be delighted to take your questions and have an opportunity for us to engage in a little more dialogue in this monologue. So USMCA is key for our continued good relationship with Mexico, no question about that. Mexico is undergoing a little bit of a political transformation. Mexico elected Andrés López Obrador now about a year or so. He was a former mayor of Mexico City, but he also had a history as a pretty good agitator from the left. Since governing, he has been a bit more moderate than some of the worst fears were, but he also does have a lot of ideas that are counter to the way Mexico's been going. Mexico's been going in a way of more private enterprise, privatizing a lot of state entities, and things of that nature, which have worked very well for the Mexican economy. He's a little bit more on the far left regis and does not have some of the same ideas that the immediately prior Mexican governments have had. So important to keep a close eye on Mexico. They elect the president for one term. The term is 6 years, and the president cannot be reelected. So he's just in the first couple of years of his term, and it'll be, I mean, our relationship with Mexico is so important. And obviously they do have a tremendous problem with the border region, particularly in terms of drugs and whatnot, and public safety. They got a lot of challenges and a lot of problems, but they're such an important neighbor, and don't forget we have a tremendous border with them. So their success really is our success, and their stability is also of great benefit to us. But as we go south from there, we got Central America, and Central America is really a bit of a mess. Guatemala, Honduras, our Salvador to some degree, our failed states or borderline failed states. Our immigration problems is coming from those areas particularly, and they are a real problem in terms of gang violence and a whole lot of other difficult things, and a real important lack of governance there. They are sort of democratic, but there's never a lot of corruption in that area. So it's a lot of problems in the Central American region. They're small, but there are a lot of problems. The shining star of it all is Panama. You know, we gave up on the canal many years ago, and that was roundly criticized by the time, and I probably did because, you know, it was free, right? You can always criticize when something is done, and the one who does it gets the criticism. The fact of the matter is it's been a pretty good thing. Panama has done incredibly well. They're a democracy, they're stable, they're really enjoying a good bit of prosperity, and they've done not only a terrific job of running the canal, but they've also built a new, bigger one that was a phenomenal project, and that seems to have been built on time, on budget, and be very, very productive. As we go south, we end up in Colombia, and Colombia has been, again, prosperous and good. We had, when I was in the cabinet, it started by Bill Clinton, continued by George W. Bush, something called Plan Colombia, where we engaged with Colombia and gave them assistance, military assistance, to fight the narco-traffickers that were these crazy band of leftists that were a combination of narco-traffickers and leftist guerrilla movement that were destroying Colombia. We're destroying Colombia. And we worked with them on a bipartisan basis year after year. I did when I was in the cabinet to the extent that I could influence things. And, you know, I was kind of a roving ambassador for Latin America because I was the only Spanish-speaking person in the cabinet. And so I ended up getting sent on some missions and whatnot. It was very interesting, and I enjoyed it a lot. And it was, I think, productive. And so we had a very close partnership with Colombia in trying to fight and root out all of these bad elements that were there. Very successful. Ended up in such success that Colombia is now a great story, stable democracy, rule of law prevails. It's become a tourist destination in many ways. I mean, my oldest son and his wife have been to Cartagena for vacation. Back in the old days, Nat and I used to work with Colombia back before it was not peaceful. And it's amazing the evolution and the turnaround. But they have a challenge, and the challenge is that they're bordered with Venezuela. They've taken in 3 million refugees in the last 3 years from Venezuela. Venezuela is a failed state. Venezuela, you You've read enough about Venezuela in the news, I'm not going to bore you with it, but we're essentially at a stalemate between Maduro and Guaido, and essentially it's a bit of a foreign policy failure for our country that we have not been able to move that situation to a better place. Not that it's our responsibility, but it is in our backyard, and it is important that what is bad about Venezuela doesn't inflict more instability into Colombia, because 3 million refugees to a country of 40 million people, that's a big problem. And so I'm hopeful that Colombia can get through this and not be, excuse me, not further disrupted by that situation. So I'll leave Venezuela alone because we know that's a mess. And you've read about it. But if we move on south, Argentina has Bolsonaro as president. He is an atypical president. Interesting guy, but very much from the right. And, you know, the problem with Brazil is that 50% of the economy of Latin America is in Brazil, and they have not been doing well. And part of it is because they've made some governance mistakes in having a very left-leaning governments through 2 particular governments, and with a lot of corruption, and that ended up putting them in economic trouble. So the recovery of Brazil is an important consideration, and one that would be important for the region and for us. Beyond Brazil, Argentina just had an election. 4 years ago, they elected a very good president who was doing all of the things that are necessary to be done in order to bring the country into a better economic situation. Pay the debt, lower the debt. Dom, you love it. President Macri did everything right. And I remember being down there, and we were so excited about what all was happening in Argentina. And my Argentinian friends that work with us at JP Morgan were saying, and I hope things economically turn around fast enough so that he can get reelected. Well, guess what? They didn't. And so last Sunday, we elected, the Argentinians elected Alberto Fernandez, and his vice president is Cristina Fernandez Kirchner. I guess it was a shortage of Fernandez's outside government, so now we have 2, vice president and president, both Fernandez. And Cristina Kirchner was the immediate past president before Mr. Macri, and incredibly corrupt, incredibly leftist, a big ally of Venezuela's, and nothing much good there. President Bush sent me to the transfer of power when her husband, Nestor Kirchner, was elected to office in 2002, I think it was. And then he died of a heart attack. She runs for his job. And he was bad, but she was a lot worse than he was. And so anyway, and then the picture of stability in South America. 3 weeks ago, I would have been telling you, boy, go to Chile. What a great country, peaceful, tranquil, good economy. Everything's great. Well, guess what? The last 2 weeks have been nothing but hell. The streets are mobbed by people. A tremendous populist wave. They were going to be hosting the Asian Pacific Conference. The APAC conference was to take place in Chile. In fact, President Bush was to be meeting with Xi Jinping to talk about initial trade deals and whatnot. And this morning or yesterday, the president of Chile had to cancel hosting the meeting because things are so disruptive and so violent. And both, I think, in Argentina's case, and I think also in Chile's case, we see this populist movement, this wave of populism that is really, I think, eroding a lot of democratic values. Now, there's a place for populism, but I'm afraid too much of it, particularly in fragile democracies, can be a very bad thing. So now for the fun part of the talk. Okay, I forgot that part. So it's all bad, I'm sorry. Washington is a hot mess, and Latin America is not much better. But I think FSU is going to beat Miami Saturday, so maybe that young lady doesn't have to rely on Halloween for her fun. So anyway, with that, let me open it up to your questions, and I'd be delighted to try to talk about other topics too, if you're interested, and whatever comes your way. So take it away.
Senator, will there be a
Yep, Don. Shy guy over here, Don.
Senator, thank you for your incredible service to both nationally and the state of Florida and Orlando and so forth. What might be 3 or 4 things that you think we can do as anti-oxidants, if you will, against the corruption tax, as you kind of said? To fight corruption, what are the kind of things, rule of law, constitutional republic?
You mean abroad?
Yeah, abroad. Yeah.
Oh, the big problem right along in all of the above is rule of law. I think an independent judiciary is essential, and having transparency in that regard, I think, makes all the difference in the world. And I think all of the problems I'm talking about would be benefited by more fighting on corruption. I think, well, we do some of it. We do, foreign aid is not given to countries unless they meet certain guidelines and certain standards. A lot of them can't, and that's a problem. So I think, it's really, really an important consideration, something that as we interact with other countries, we need to always be striving to encourage. I'm on the board of the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a wonderful organization and does a lot of good, and it was created under the Ronald Reagan era, and it was particularly focused on helping create democracies in the Eastern European world after the fall of the Soviet Union. It does much more than that, and it works all over the world, promoting democracy and human rights, but building institutions of democracy are also terribly important. An election is just a manifestation of democracy, but it's not democracy. Democracy is the Economic Club in Tallahassee. It is Don Calabria doing the things that he does in his organization. It is all of the above. The working together keeps politicians honest, creates environments and atmospherics and good research so that folks can then react to that in a democratic way when the day they go vote, when they're an informed voter. All of these things have to work together. And so these immature democracies really need corruption fighting and development of institutions of democracy along the same lines. But, political parties, the whole works. Barney.
Senator, you talked about South America, and thanks for going around. Peru is having problems, so is Bolivia as well. So I have a two-part question. Number one, what kind of advice, not asking for any confidential information, but what kind of advice and counsel do you provide to the senior leadership of J.P. Morgan Chase about doing business in South America and in Central America? And then the one place that I think many of us are very interested in, particularly since you were born there, is Cuba. And what do you think is the future there? And I'm talking about the future for American business.
Yeah.
Obviously, probably after the next regime goes by and
Right.
gets back.
So, look, I think J.P. Morgan is a worldwide bank. We've had a presence in Latin America for 150 years, and we're going to continue to be there. It's unfortunate that sometimes the climate isn't good. We don't do business in Venezuela. The whole time I wanted to work with J.P. Morgan, I said, look, I'll be glad to help in Latin America, but I'm not going to Venezuela. I don't think it'd be good for my health. And closely aligned with Cuba, Anyway, and they said, no, don't worry about it, because we're trying to, whatever little business we have left in Venezuela, we're trying to end it. So you can't do business in certain environments. But Argentina is a country where we have 2,000-3,000 people that work there. It's a regional hub for us, tremendously important. So whether a government is left-leaning, right-leaning, good or bad, we're still going to be there, and we need to be there. So we work around the world, and we're going to continue to do that. In terms of Cuba, the United States did a lot in the Obama administration to change our relationship with Cuba. There was an unfortunate situation is that Cuba did not reciprocate. Cuba did not open up. Cuba today is not like Vietnam. Cuba today is not like China. Cuba today is more like North Korea. So it's very difficult to engage when your dance partner is not engaging back in a way that's useful, that is helpful, and that is conducive to better economic ties. So it really is going to be a time when Cuba has a different government than it does today. And I think the time, they're in the process of transition down there, and they just got to figure it out. I mean, it's not rocket science what they need to do in terms of a banking system, in terms of a stable single currency. They have two currencies. I mean, there's a lot of stupid things they do. Doing business in Cuba seemed like a panacea to a lot of people. When people looked hard at it during the Obama years, before things retrenched a bit, it wasn't a good business decision. It's not China. There's not like 1 billion people customer base there. It's an 11 million impoverished people with no spending power. Rules of the game are not particularly favorable. So you got to have rule of law. You got to have banking. There's a lot of things that they just haven't, come back to do. It's going up. So anyway, well, I think my time is up.
Well,
thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. As a token of our sincere appreciation, we want to give you the Best Florida Book Award, The Land Remembered, the novel Patrick D. Smith. You actually represent all that Florida is. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate it.